So welcome everybody to our webinar, Plant-Based Diets for Pregnancy and Young Kids. My name is Dr. Nanine Wemer and I am the Programs Coordinator at ProVeg South Africa. We are the South African branch of ProVeg International, a non-profit food awareness organization that strives towards a world where everyone can choose delicious and healthy food that is good for all humans, animals, and the planet. To introduce myself as the moderator of this panel, I graduated with my Bachelor of Medicine and Surgery in 2018. I am not currently practicing as a medical doctor, but I have completed my education. And my own health concerns is what led me towards learning about a whole food plant-based diet. And I was a medical student at the time. And I received absolutely no training and education on a plant-based diet. And that's why I am so excited for these ProVeg webinars, because we are sharing information and education that really is not available anywhere else in this country. So I believe in the power of a nutrient-rich plant-based food diet, as well as the massive impact that a plant-based food system can have on the environment. And we have had a series of webinars this year, and we have heard that a plant-based diet is appropriate for all stages of life. But tonight we are specifically going to be talking about the stage of pregnancy and of early childhood. We have some amazing panelists here tonight, and I'm really excited to introduce everyone. I'm going to give a quick introduction. We have firstly Dr. Brenda Davis, who is a registered dietitian, a pioneer in plant-based nutrition, and an internationally acclaimed speaker. As a prolific nutrition and health writer, she has authored or co-authored 12 books with nearly 1 million copies print in 15 different languages. Her most recent works include Nourish, the definitive plant-based nutrition guide for families, which will be released later this month. Kick Diabetes Essentials from 2019 and Kick Diabetes Cookbook 2018. Brenda is the lead clinical nutrition specialist for the Diabetes Intervention Research Project in the Marshall Islands. She lives with her husband Paul in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Welcome, Brenda. We are very grateful to have you here. And then we have Dr. Reshma Shah. She is a board certified pediatrician and an affiliate clinical instructor at Stanford University School of Medicine. She has additional training and certification in plant-based nutrition and cooking, and is the co-author of Nourish, the definitive plant-based nutrition guide for families, out in November, later this month. She lives in the Bay Area in America with her husband and 2 children. Welcome, Dr. Reshma Shah. Thank you for joining us from the other side of the globe. And then lastly, we have Jessica Kotlowitz, a registered dietitian in South Africa who is passionate about the use of plant-based diets for the treatment and prevention of obesity and chronic diseases of lifestyle, such as diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, and cancer. Jessica qualified with a BSc in dietetics from Stellenbosch University in 2012, after which she completed her community service year at Baragwanath Hospital in Johannesburg, where she focused on all aspects of clinical nutrition. She began her master's degree in 2014 and researched the effects of plant-based diets in an attempt to find solutions to some of her own health problems. She also focuses on helping athletes, pregnant women, lactating women, and children to achieve optimal health, well-being, and performance while following vegan or vegetarian diets. So this evening, each of our panelists are going to speak and provide a presentation for about 15 minutes, and thereafter we will be diving into some questions and answers. So if anybody has a question for any of our panelists, please put it in the Q&A. Otherwise, we will get started.
Well, Nanine, thank you so much for the introduction and for inviting me to join the panel today. I'm really excited to be talking about plant-based diets for children, and I'm going to begin just by sharing my screen to start the presentation. Okay, I hope you can all see this. So I'm going to be talking just briefly about plant-based diets for children in a broad sense. I'll begin by reviewing some of the benefits and questions around safety and adequacy of plant-based diets for children. And then Brenda and Jess are going to talk about pregnancy and lactation, as well as early childhood and the toddler years. So I wanted to begin just by broadly defining what we mean by a plant-based diet. In its simplest sense, a plant-based diet is essentially a diet that aims to maximize the consumption of nutrient-dense plant foods while minimizing processed foods and animal foods in the diet. And it encourages the consumption of lots of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lentils, beans, seeds, and nuts. So that's sort of the broad definition of what we mean when we say plant-based diet. And there are three broad benefits to a plant-based diet. It's a healthy, sustainable, and humane way of eating. And as healthcare professionals, we're going to be focusing mostly on the health advantages of a plant-based diet, but I'll also touch briefly on some of the issues related to sustainability and ethically informed food choices. In terms of the health advantages, we could probably spend the entire time just talking about the health advantages of a plant-based diet, but I'm just going to touch on some of the broad advantages in terms of improved mortality and longevity, a reduced risk of heart disease, reduced risk of cancer, and reduced risk of type 2 diabetes, and obviously weaved some of these concepts into health for childhood. We know that nutrition is intimately connected to many of the chronic diseases we see in the United States and throughout the world. In the United States, it's estimated that 80% of heart attacks, 90% of type 2 diabetes, 70% of colorectal cancer, as well as a variety of other conditions from stroke and osteoporosis, as well as constipation, dementia, and so many other things are directly related to what we eat. We can learn a lot in terms of what diet is best for health by looking at the blue zones. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the blue zones are these geographical pockets located throughout the world that have the largest concentration of centenarians. So these are people that are living to age 100 and beyond in fairly reasonable health. And we can find these populations in Okinawa, Japan, in Icaria, Greece, in Sardinia, Italy, the Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica, and right here in California, where I'm from, in Loma Linda amongst the Seventh-day Adventists. And researchers wanted to know what allows these communities to enjoy such vibrant, long-lived health. And they found actually quite a bit of overlap in these communities. And so what they determined the secret sauce of these communities is that they all tend to share a strong focus on family. They have low rates of smoking. They tend to lead physically active lives. They're engaged in their communities. And when it comes specifically to diet, all of these communities enjoy a plant-based diet and have legumes or beans as a staple in the diet. We know that high animal protein intake is associated with mortality. In this study that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2016, the researchers concluded that high animal protein intake was positively associated with cardiovascular mortality, and that high plant protein intake actually was protective against all-cause mortality and cardiovascular mortality. And this was especially prominent in people who had one lifestyle risk factor, such as hypertension or elevated cholesterol. We also know that plant-based diets can be protective in terms of our risk of developing heart disease. There have been two large prospective studies, the EPIC Oxford study and the Adventist Health study, which show a protective effect of plant-based diets in terms of risk of cardiovascular disease. And you might be thinking in a talk for children and as a pediatrician that this is not something that would be in my wheelhouse. But we know that heart disease actually manifests in childhood. While we may not see the clinical effects in until the fifth, sixth, and seventh decades of life, we know that the damage is beginning early in life. In fact, autopsy studies have shown that we can see fatty streaks in the aorta of children as young as 3 years of age, and by age 10, nearly all children have evidence of some of these fatty streaks. And by the time we're in our 20s, we're beginning to see evidence of these fatty streaks in our coronary arteries. So even though it is an adult disease, the early signs of it are developing in childhood. Cancer is also a leading cause of death and morbidity throughout the world. The World Cancer Research Fund outlined several risk factors that can contribute to the development of cancer. And some of them seem pretty obvious, like obesity or smoking, but they recognize also that diet plays an enormous role in terms of our risk of developing cancer, especially for certain cancers. The panel concluded that a healthy diet and lifestyle behaviors could prevent 40% of cases of cancer worldwide, and that basing our diets around plant foods like vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, all of which contain a lot of fiber and other nutrients, can reduce our risk of developing cancer. The International Agency for Cancer Research, which is the cancer research agency for the World Health Organization, published a report several years ago in which they wanted to look at the risk of developing cancer from the consumption of red and processed meats. They found that processed meats, so things like bacon, salami, sausages, were a group 1 carcinogen, which would put it in the same category as asbestos and tobacco, and that red meat was a group 2A or probable carcinogen, putting it in the same category as DDT and glyphosate. So at a bare minimum, we should be looking to significantly reduce, if not eliminate, our consumption of these types of foods. Similarly, diabetes in the United States has been increasing over the last several decades, and there's been a sharp rise in the cases of diabetes since the mid-1990s. Some experts estimate that if the current trends continue, that in the United States, by the year 2050, 1 in every 3 Americans will have type 2 diabetes. And this is also a global phenomenon. You can see that the rates of type 2 diabetes have been increasing worldwide, even in low-income communities. And we also know, just as with heart disease, that a plant-based diet can be protective in terms of our risk of developing type 2 diabetes. In this large prospective study amongst the Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda, they found a reduced risk of developing diabetes the more the diet veered towards plant-based. And in fact, vegans had a 60% reduction in their risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And again, just as with heart disease, we know that we're seeing type 2 diabetes increasingly in childhood. When I trained many, many years ago, we used to call it adult onset diabetes, but the nomenclature had to be changed because we began to see the disorder in children. It's been diagnosed in children as young as 8 years of age. The real travesty of having a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes in childhood is that children end up living longer with the complications, so things like blindness and vascular damage and kidney damage. And there have been several risk factors related to the development of type 2 diabetes, including obesity, having a mother with gestational diabetes, certain ethnic groups are at increased risk, and certainly a family history. And some studies have shown that breastfeeding can be protective. The increasing rates in type 2 diabetes have paralleled the increasing rates of obesity throughout the world. In this study, they found there was a stepwise progression, lower progression in BMI, the more the diet trended towards vegan, with vegans having the only average BMI that fell within the normal range. And increasingly, this is a problem in childhood as well. By age 6, if a child is obese, they're more likely than not to remain obese. 70 to 80% of adolescents that are obese will remain obese into adulthood. And the statistic that I found to be actually the most shocking was that being overweight in childhood predicted adult disease regardless of adult body weight. So if you have a child that was overweight or obese in childhood, they have a slightly increased risk of some of these conditions, even if they have a normal weight in adulthood. Perhaps one of the real dilemmas that people face is that it seems that every day there's a new nutrition headline that can confuse the public. So many people feel like if even the experts can't agree on what diet is really best for health, why should we even pay attention? But when you sort of put the headlines aside and look at the broad consensus of the leading dietetic, medical, and research organizations throughout the world, from the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics to the Harvard School of Public Health, the World Health Organization, and the list goes on and on, there's actually quite a bit of broad consensus in terms of what diet constitutes a healthy diet. And experts agree that we should be limiting our intake of things like saturated and trans fats, as well as refined carbohydrates, cholesterol, and red and processed meats. And by this point, it's not going to be a surprise what experts are recommending we should be eating. And again, this is a broad consensus from a lot of the leading organizations that I showed previously. Vegetables, fruits, whole grains, nuts, and seeds, all of which we talked about are the foundation of a plant-based diet. So just to summarize really quickly the health benefits in this paper published by David Katz, who's a renowned physician and leading nutrition expert, he says that the evidence is strong, consistent, and compelling that a diet predominantly or even exclusively of whole plant foods can promote health, selectively treat and reverse disease, and confer comparable benefit to the planet. What we should be eating then for disease prevention and health promotion for the sake of people and planet alike is clear enough. The truth is that we should all be eating plant-predominant diets. The what of future eating is not in question. The questions are all about how we get there from here. And this is a perfect segue. We know that food is intimately connected to our health, but increasingly we're seeing that experts are also finding that food is intimately connected to the health of our environment. Animal agriculture takes an enormous toll on our environment. Some experts Some experts feel that it is responsible for over 50% of greenhouse gas emissions. It's the leading cause of rainforest destruction, species extinction, ocean dead zones, and water pollution. It's responsible for 91% of the Amazon destruction and occupies 45% of the Earth's ice-free landmass. Meat and dairy take up a third of the Earth's freshwater use. And looking at this in a slightly different way, the standard American diet, which is becoming sort of spreading globally, takes 2 football fields worth of land to feed 1 person. And those same 2 football fields could feed 14 people eating a plant-based diet. In terms of resource use in the United States, it's estimated that 80% of the antibiotics go towards animal agriculture. Additionally, some experts say that 50% of the world's grains go towards feeding livestock, and this is happening at the same time that nearly 1 billion people are going hungry each and every day. And many experts feel that we could largely solve the problem of world hunger if we all veered more towards a plant-based diet. The E-Lancet Commission on Food, Planet, and Health was a publication that was published and released in 2019, and they assembled 37 leading scientists from a variety of disciplines in 16 countries to answer the question of, can we feed a future population of 10 billion people a healthy diet within planetary boundaries? And what the commission found was that food is the single strongest lever to optimize human health and environmental sustainability on Earth. They concluded that a diet rich in plant-based foods and with fewer animal source foods confers both improved health and environmental benefits. And then the last little benefit that I want to touch on briefly is the ethical considerations of our food choices. And we've got a lovely introduction of Brenda Davis, and she really is as phenomenal as she was described. And she has a beautiful quote from one of her books that I always like to share from Becoming Vegan. She says that being vegan isn't about personal purity or about moral superiority. It's about making a conscious choice to widen your circle of compassion by avoiding animal exploitation as far as is possible and practical. And we know that most people feel that animals raised for food should not suffer. And in the United States, 10 billion farm animals are raised each and every year and slaughtered, and 99% of these animals come from factory farms. So there's a countless amount of suffering that these animals endure. And then lastly, I want to just touch on very briefly, I know Jess and Brenda will talk about this in more detail, but just the adequacy and safety of plant-based diets for children, because it's wonderful that we have all these advantages to plant-based diets, but ultimately, if we can't show that they're safe and appropriate for growing children, it really doesn't matter much to parents. There was a position statement that was put out by the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics in 2016, in which they unequivocally and very strongly stated that it is the position of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics that appropriately planned vegetarian diets, including total vegetarian or vegan diets, are healthful, nutritionally adequate, and may provide health benefits in the prevention and treatment of certain diseases. Well-planned vegetarian diets are appropriate for individuals during all stages of the life cycle, including pregnancy, lactation, infancy, childhood, adolescence, and for athletes. And I think the place where most parents and even healthcare providers get caught up is on the words appropriately planned and well planned, because what does that even mean? And are we capable of paying such close attention to the diets that we feed our children? And what we hope to show you is actually that when we serve children a tray of food that looks like this, we don't really wonder or question whether it's meeting their nutritional needs. But if we were to replace that food with a tray that looks like this, we become very concerned all of a sudden whether it's going to meet their nutritional needs. And really all diets for children need to be well planned. Studies have shown consistently that children raised on lacto-ovo-vegetarian diets and vegan diets can grow just as well as omnivorous children. There have been some studies that have identified lag in growth during the transition time when babies are being weaned off of breast milk and or formula into the toddler years, and we'll talk specifically about that. And some of the earlier research studies that showed concerns around growth for vegan and vegetarian children often followed communities that followed highly restrictive diets, things like using homemade infant formula, not using appropriate supplementation or fortification, and those diets are grossly inadequate and would not be recommended for children. But consistently, studies have shown that appropriately planned plant-based diets for children are safe and they achieve normal growth milestones. So in terms of plant-based diets and parenting today, I think that families are becoming increasingly aware of appropriate supplementation, and we're going to talk briefly about some of those issues. I think healthcare providers are also becoming increasingly comfortable supporting families, and there has been such a growth of and availability of nutrient-rich and fortified foods within the plant-based community that I think we can allow our families to grow and thrive eating plant-based diets. And just to leave you with this wonderful quote from Albert Einstein, who is a well-known vegetarian, he says that vegetarian food leaves a deep impression on our nature. If the whole world adopts a vegetarian diet or vegetarianism, it can change the destiny of humankind. Thank you so much. And I'm gonna pass it on next to talk about pregnancy and lactation. Hold on.
Thank you, Reshma. I'm just going to open my PowerPoint for everyone. Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Jessica. I'm also known as the Green Dietitian. And I just wanted to say I've been looking through the participants and it's so great to see so many local South African dietitians watching today. And I also wanted to share with everyone who doesn't know that I'm also 24 weeks pregnant at the moment. So it's really special to be sharing not only my, I guess, academic knowledge of following a plant-based diet during pregnancy, but also my practical knowledge now and what I found has helped me a lot. Okay, so firstly, I know a lot of us have concerns about whether it is safe to follow a plant-based diet during pregnancy. And I just wanted to share, I know Reshma shared this, but the ADA position statement is really a great evidence-based statement. And it was put together by the biggest nutrition and dietetics association in the world. And they basically concluded that a plant-based diet is appropriate for all stages of the life cycle, including pregnancy. And I also wanted to share this quote from the American Academy of Pediatrics, which says that children exhibit good growth and thrive on most lacto-ovo vegetarian and vegan diets when they are well planned and supplemented appropriately. And I know from working with my patients that, and I do see a lot of pregnant women in practice that want to follow a plant-based diet in pregnancy, that a lot of people have a lot of nutrient concerns when they enter into a vegan pregnancy. And there are certainly some nutrients that we should be focusing on, especially if we are doing a plant-based pregnancy. So these are just the nutrients that I always like to inform my patients of and make sure that everyone is getting enough of. But unfortunately, we only have 15 minutes today, so we won't have a chance to talk about each and every one of them. But I'm hoping that we can cover some of your questions surrounding some of these nutrients in the Q&A session. And I really wanted to cover the main nutrients that people are the most concerned about and answer your questions about those. So I actually asked, I did a little poll on my Instagram. Thank you to those of you who participated. And I asked if you were undertaking a vegan pregnancy or if you had a family member or a loved one undertaking a vegan pregnancy, which nutrient would you be the most concerned about? And 54% of people said iron, and then 23% said vitamin B12, and 23% said protein. And then there were a few outliers that said things like omega-3 or choline. So I'm going to focus on these main three for today and just give you some really practical advice on how to get enough of these nutrients during pregnancy. So firstly, for protein, we do have increased needs for protein during pregnancy. And basically the amount of protein that you need during pregnancy is 1.1 gram per kilogram per day. And this should be based on pre-pregnancy weight or on your weight during early pregnancy. So for example, if you were 65 kilos before pregnancy, your protein need during pregnancy would be 71 grams per day. So that would be sort of an average for most women. And then I just wanted to show you some protein contents of some common plant foods, because a lot of people believe that plant foods don't contain sufficient protein. So you can see there that, you know, beans, lentils, soy products generally contain a really good amount of protein in them. Mock meats are also a good source of protein, especially if they're made from soy or seitan. And then I find that a lot of my patients believe that almond milk is a good source of protein. So I wanted to include that in the list. You can see that almond milk only has 1 gram of protein per serving. So we don't consider it a good source of protein. Soy milk is a good source of protein, however, and nuts are definitely a good source of protein. And just to compare, animal foods have about 7 to 8 grams of protein per 30 gram serving. So pretty equivalent to plant foods in terms of protein content. And then also just to bust some myths out there, I see a lot of, memes being shared on social media showing that vegetables have tons of protein, or that vegans and vegetarians can get protein from broccoli and spinach. And these foods do have some protein in them, but they aren't really considered a high protein food. So you can see vegetables and greens have about 1 to 3 grams of protein per serving. Grains also contain some protein, but they don't contribute greatly to our protein intake for the day. And then obviously protein powders, like plant-based protein powders, like pea-based protein powders, do have a good amount of protein in them. So that's just an overview of which foods we do consider to be good sources of protein versus which foods might have some protein in them, but we don't really consider them to be amazing sources of protein. So just some practical guidelines for meeting protein needs during pregnancy. Firstly, I think it is important to eat a balanced diet and to focus on plenty of nutrient-rich whole plant foods, as Reshma was saying, grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, fruits, and vegetables, because all of these foods do contribute to protein intake and do contribute to nutrient intake for the day. And to definitely make sure to meet your calorie needs during pregnancy and your energy needs, so to eat enough food in general, and to mostly try to meet these needs through these whole plant foods, which do contribute to protein intake for the day. And in order to quantify your protein, because this is something my patients struggle with, and we certainly don't expect people to be counting grams of protein every day. So I usually tell people that if they can just aim for 4 to 5 servings of protein-rich foods a day, then they should be getting enough protein during pregnancy. And a serving is equal to half a cup of beans or chickpeas or lentils, or a handful of nuts or peanuts or seeds, or a cup of soy milk or yogurt, or half a cup of a soy food like tofu or tempeh or a meat alternative, or it could be a pea-based protein powder. So just to make this even more practical for you, I've put together a little sample meal plan showing you how you could put together a day which contains 71 grams of protein on a plant-based diet. So if for breakfast you had an overnight oat pot and you added a cup of soy milk as your protein source, along with the fruit and the oats, you would get a good 13 grams of protein. If for a snack you had a nachi or some peanuts, you would get a good 8 grams of protein. And then for lunch, you could have some sort of salad bowl with some beans or legumes and vegetables and maybe some whole grains like quinoa. And that would give you a good 17 grams of protein. And then maybe at a late afternoon snack, you would have some seed crackers with some hummus, and this would amount to 9 grams of protein. And then supper, you could also have a healthy meal, balanced meal with vegetables and maybe some sort of grain or noodles and some soy products like tofu or mock chicken strips. And this would add about 24 grams of protein to your day. So all in all, if you added that up, it would be 71 grams of protein. And I've highlighted there which foods are at each meal are the high protein foods that are contributing the biggest amount of protein to the meal. So you can see it's pretty easy to do this, and it's pretty easy to get about 5 or even 6 servings of high protein foods a day on a plant-based diet. Okay, so let's move on to iron. And again, I think people's concerns about iron needs during pregnancy are definitely valid. We definitely need more iron during pregnancy. Non-vegetarian women need 27 milligrams per day during pregnancy. And for vegetarian or vegan women, we make this a little bit higher because plant-based iron sources are a little bit more variable in terms of absorption. So we try to aim for 48 milligrams per day of iron. And I just wanted to mention that studies have found that most pregnant women don't meet their daily iron requirements, and that about 50%, so 1 in 2 women of reproductive age, do suffer from iron deficiency. So iron deficiency is very common in women in general and definitely during pregnancy, and it's really important that we guard against this so that we have good outcomes from pregnancy. So I just wanted to mention that your animal-based iron is called heme iron, and it is slightly more easily absorbed, whereas plant-based iron is called non-heme iron, and its absorption actually can be hindered or helped by various factors. So it's important when you are following a plant-based diet, specifically when your iron needs are high, to understand how to aid in iron absorption. So we get these little guys called phytates. They're basically antioxidant compounds, and they are found in certain plant foods, and they actually bind to iron and inhibit absorption of iron. So we want to try break those phytates away from iron so that we can absorb our iron efficiently. And some of the processes that help to break down phytates are things like fermentation, toasting, sprouting, soaking, and then adding a vitamin C rich food to our iron rich foods. So just as a summary for iron absorption, vitamin C promotes iron absorption. It can boost absorption by up to 500%. And then also preparation techniques such as fermenting, soaking, sprouting, and toasting can help to improve iron absorption. And tannins found in tea, coffee, and wine inhibit iron absorption. Phytates inhibit iron absorption, and high amounts of calcium in the diet or through supplements can also inhibit iron absorption. So just some basic sources of plant-based iron includes basically legumes and soy products, dark green leafy vegetables, blackstrap molasses for those that can tolerate it, and dried fruit, and then also cast iron cookware can help us get more iron into our food. So this is just a summary of, the content of iron found in various plant foods. I'm not going to go through it all, but you will get a copy of the slideshow, so then you have it as reference. But as you can see, in terms of vegetables, spinach and Swiss chard have a good amount of iron in them, and your nori and dulse and wakame, your seaweeds, have a good amount of iron in them. And then I do consider all legumes and soy foods to be a good source of iron, and certain nuts and seeds are also a good source of iron, as well as blackstrap molasses, like I mentioned, and dark chocolate. And just as a comparison, 90 grams of beef has 2.6 milligrams of iron compared to, for example, half a cup of lentils, which has 3.3 milligrams of iron. So plant foods do have plenty of iron, even compared to animal foods. So just some basic tips for meeting iron needs during pregnancy. I do recommend taking a prenatal multivitamin or an iron supplement, which contains at least the daily dose for iron for pregnant women, which is 27 milligrams per day. And then I also recommend testing iron levels before trying to conceive in order to correct deficiencies before becoming pregnant. And then also to test iron levels regularly through your pregnancy, and to take an extra supplement if you do become deficient. You can also use cast iron cookware where that's possible and practical for you. And then in terms of diet, I definitely recommend making sure to eat an iron-rich food at each main meal, so at least 3 times a day, and to combine this with a vitamin C-rich food for absorption, and to also avoid tea and coffee within 3 hours of meal times or of taking iron supplements, so that you can get the best absorption possible. So these are just some easy ways that you can combine iron and vitamin C. So you can see the Mexican salad again. If you had the red kidney beans as your iron source, and then you had peppers and tomatoes and lime juice in the salad, that would be your vitamin C source. So that's a great way to absorb your iron. Something like hummus is a great way to actually absorb iron because chickpeas have lots of iron, and then there's lemon juice in hummus, which has vitamin C. Black bean chili, when we cook foods, it often kills a lot of the vitamin C. So even though chili has tomatoes in it, some of the vitamin C might not be active anymore. So just adding some fresh lime juice on top and adding some fresh coriander can help to add more vitamin C to the meals that we absorb the iron in the beans. This is one of my favorite options during pregnancy, and especially great in the first trimester if you're nauseous, is just to have a pea-based protein powder as your iron source, and then berries or fruit as your vitamin C source in a smoothie. And this one's a nice comfort food example. Your iron source could be a soy-based burger patty, and your vitamin C source could be fresh tomato and fresh microgreens. This is an easy snack for most of us, just some peanuts and an orange for vitamin C. And this is one of my favorite meals, is a tofu sauce. So it's made by blending tofu to make a creamy sauce. So the tofu sauce and the peas would have iron in them, and the vitamin C would come from the lemon juice in the sauce and fresh rocket. Okay. So lastly, just about meeting vitamin B12 needs during pregnancy, which was a big concern for a lot of you. We need 2.6 micrograms of vitamin B12 per day during pregnancy, which is actually a relatively small amount. But studies have shown us that vegetarian pregnant women often don't meet the RDAs for vitamin B12, and that vitamin B12 levels can be lower in vegetarian women. So we think it is very important, obviously, to include a reliable source of vitamin B12 in the daily diet, whether you're pregnant or not, but definitely during pregnancy it's important. And the most reliable way to do this is through supplements, because we don't have, there's no naturally occurring vitamin B12 in plant-based foods. So it could be that you get vitamin B12 through some fortified foods. So those are foods where vitamin B12 is added to the product, or it could be through supplements. But the most reliable way to do it is definitely through supplements. I'm going to just show you, I put together a little summary of some of the B12 fortified foods in South Africa. We're relatively limited in terms of B12 fortified foods. And you can see that the amounts of vitamin B12 in a lot of these foods is quite small, which means that often you would have to eat 3 to 4 servings a day of some of these foods, and it would become quite difficult to plan your diet around vitamin B12, and there would still be concerns around whether you're meeting your B12 needs. And as you can see, the cost of doing it this way would be quite expensive. So I definitely recommend that pregnant and breastfeeding women supplement with vitamin B12. And this is just a cost comparison for comparison to the fortified food. So it actually works out to be more cost effective to supplement. And these are 2 of my preferred supplements in South Africa for vitamin B12. So that's basically vitamin B12 covered. And thank you to everyone. I hope this gave you a little bit of reassurance that a healthy plant-based pregnancy is definitely possible, and it definitely has health benefits. And I'm looking forward to answering some of your questions in the Q&A, but I'm going to hand over to Brenda now.
Okay, can you hear me? I think so. Everybody's muted, so I'll just assume that everyone can hear me. First of all, thank you so much, Jessica. That was a wonderful presentation, and Reshma as well. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of this. And to all the participants who are here, we really appreciate your attendance, and we really hope that this provides you with information that will be helpful to you. So I am sort of progressing on with plant-based and toddlers. And a brief outline of what I'll be covering. I'm going to talk first about best milks for baby. Then we'll move on to complementary or solid foods. And we will finish up by discussing avoiding any nutritional shortfalls during our infant and toddler years. I'd like to preface the presentation by saying that infancy and early childhood are stages of the life cycle when adequate growth and development are really our top nutritional priorities. And plant-based diets can be less energy dense. So like all diets for infants and toddlers, they must be designed to ensure adequate calories and nutrition. So let's move on to talking about the best milks for baby. And I don't think anyone would disagree that human breast milk is best for human infants. And what is generally recommended is exclusive breastfeeding for the first 6 months of life. And mothers are consistently encouraged to continue breastfeeding for as long as it benefits their baby and themselves, or it feels all right for both of them. Generally, we really encourage mothers to nurse for at least a year, but normal human weaning is 2 to 4 years. So if you can extend breastfeeding to those ages, you will be providing your infant with a huge advantage in terms of nutrition. Of course, we know there are many advantages of breastfeeding. Mention nutrition, but also the protective antibodies, which can help to protect against allergies, overweight, a variety of diseases like respiratory diseases. And of course, we know it's safe, economical, and convenient. It enhances our infant-mother bonding. And it also reduces mother's risk, lifetime risk of a variety of chronic diseases. A lot of people wonder if the breast milk of vegetarians is lacking somehow. And what we know is that the breast milk of vegetarians is safe and adequate, and compared to the breast milk of non-vegetarians, it contains about the same amount of macro and micronutrients, providing that the mother is including sources of those nutrients in her diet. It does, however, generally contain smaller amounts of omega-3 fatty acids, and this can be easily corrected by including a DHA or EPA-DHA supplement in the diet. And the third is actually a real bonus, and that is that the milk of plant-based mothers tends to contain fewer environmental contaminants. In fact, in some studies, they found that the breast milk of vegan women, the highest amount of persistent organic pollutants in the breast milk of the vegan mothers was actually lower than the lowest amount in omnivores. So they had, I think, 1 or 2% of the levels of omnivores. So this certainly is a perk for those eating plant-based. So what are the safe alternatives to breast milk for those that cannot breastfeed or choose not to breastfeed for whatever reason? And the only acceptable substitute for breast milk in the baby's first year is commercial infant formula. And generally what is recommended for lacto-ovo-vegetarians is a cow's milk-based formula, and for vegans, it's a soy-based milk formula, although any baby could use a soy-based milk formula. A lot of people wonder, is soy formula safe for babies because of all of the phytoestrogens and so on? And I think one of the most compelling studies was one that came from 2012, and they actually compared babies who were breastfed, babies who were fed cow's milk formula, and babies who were fed soy formula. And in all three groups, they had a normal range for brain development and cognitive function. However, the breastfed babies did outscore both the cow's milk formula babies and the soy formula babies, but the cow's milk formula babies and the soy formula babies did not differ significantly in their cognitive function. And the American Academy of Pediatrics does weigh in on this topic. They actually recommend soy milk for infants of parents who are vegan, infants with lactose intolerance, and infants with a fairly rare condition called congenital galactosemia, where they can't break down galactose. But according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, isoflavones in soy formula do not adversely affect human development, reproduction, or endocrine function in babies. So what about homemade formula? Well, homemade formulas are not appropriate for infants at all. In fact, some of the most severe malnutrition in infants that has been reported has been traced back to homemade formulas. And I can remember some of the early 1970s studies of vegan populations in sort of extreme religious communities where they were making a homemade formula. It had 17 calories per 100 mils, as opposed to the 70 that you would get in breast milk. So that definitely is concerning. And in addition to homemade formula, we don't ever replace breast milk or commercial formula with cow's milk, goat's milk, soy milk, almond milk, or any other non-dairy milk during the first year of life, at least not as a primary food, and generally better to avoid these things for the first 12 months. What about milks for toddlers? Well, starting at a year of age, a full fat, fortified, calcium fortified, and preferably vitamin D and B12 fortified soy milk can be introduced. Soy milk actually has about the same amount of protein as cow's milk, slightly less in some varieties of soy milk, but not a lot less. And one of the bonuses is that it actually contains more iron. And of course, as you know, cow's milk, one of the reasons we avoid it in the early years is because it can contribute to iron deficiency in a variety of ways. And so the extra iron in soy milk can be a bit of an advantage. Now, the one thing that you should know is that soy milk actually has slightly less fat than 2% cow's milk. So it's really important that we include other fat sources such as avocado, nut and seed butters and creams with our meals for these children. And the difference between soy milk and 2% cow's milk is not a lot. The cow's milk would have about 5 grams per cup and the soy milk about 4 of fat. Toddler formulas are very much promoted, but they're not generally needed. They can be an option for some toddlers with feeding difficulties or who are just not consuming a very balanced diet. We do need to say a few words about low protein milk. So fortified almond, coconut, oat, rice, and hemp milks, and of course unfortified of these milks as well, provide insufficient protein to serve as a sort of primary milk for toddlers. They contain approximately 1 gram of protein per cup, as opposed to the 6 to 8 in soy milk or pea milk. And another word of caution about rice milk. Generally, we don't recommend rice milk for another reason, and that is because of its arsenic content. And so it really shouldn't be used in any significant quantity for children under 5 years of age. A number of commercial rice products are an issue in that regard. So moving on to solid foods, when should babies start solids? Well, generally, it's pretty much across the board recommended that we start solids at about 6 months of age, and it can be a couple of weeks before or after that. But we don't want to start much earlier, and we don't want to start much later than 6 months of age. And we know the baby's ready when they have, good head and neck control. They can sit up and lean forward. They can, pick up food and put it in their mouth. They can turn their head away and say, no, thank you, I'm full, basically. And they can chew and swallow food. And the first foods we want to focus on are the iron-rich foods. So generally, for a lot of people, iron-fortified infant cereal mixed with breast milk or formula is the first food. And then other iron-rich foods are mashed tofu, lentils, or beans are particularly helpful. And then, of course, all other foods can be started: vegetables, fruits, grain products, nut and seed butters, and creams. And these are all very reasonable things to be including around the 6-7 months of age. What about textures? Well, back in, the 50s and 60s, we started infants on solid foods very early, 2-3 months of age quite often. And so all the foods were pureed and fed by spoon. Today, we don't do that. And so we're starting at 6 months of age. And by 6 months, babies can safely handle a variety of textures, including pureed, mashed, finely chopped, and even lumpy foods. And soft finger foods are also very appropriate for this age group. There are a few baby food no-nos. So there's several foods that are considered unsafe for babies. And in terms of animal products, any unpasteurized dairy because of the risk of food poisoning, cow's milk up to 12 months is not recommended, or goat's milk for that matter. And then processed meats, of course, should be avoided during these years. And then in terms of foods that are not animal foods, honey, raw sprouts, both because of the potential for food poisoning. Sugar-sweetened beverages should not be given to a baby or toddler. This is quite interesting, but the American Heart Association actually recommends that we don't provide any sugar to children under the age of 2. And so I think it's a good rule of thumb to avoid added sugars until at least the age of 2 years. Protein powders aren't generally recommended at this age either. And there are some really interesting summaries of contaminants in protein powders available from the I think it's called the Clean Energy Project or something like that. But protein powders are actually shockingly high in a lot of environmental contaminants. And so it's good to compare products in that regard, and it just basically shouldn't be fed to young children. And then, of course, we must be very cautious about choking hazards. So very hard foods, round foods, sticky foods. I know Reshma was saying that she commonly sees people with, feeding things that you would think would be wonderful for babies and toddlers, like apple pieces and such, that they can cause choking when they break off. So better to grate them or steam some of these harder foods for babies. And then sticky foods, we're talking about things like peanut butter. You would never give peanut butter on a spoon, for example, because it is a choking hazard. And then the other thing that I mentioned very briefly before is rice products are very significant arsenic sources, and especially rice that's grown in certain parts of the world. So it's good to do a little searching on that. Apparently, basmati rice from India is less of an issue, but a lot of the commercial products that are popular for babies, the gluten-free crackers and cereals and all of these sort of prepackaged foods made out of rice really can be a significant source of arsenic. Even the organic choices, and even things like rice syrups and rice milk. So we should, at the very least, certainly limit these foods. And I think it's important for parents to know that baby's milk is still their main source of calories during the first year of life. So it will still provide about 80% of the calories from 6 to 8 months, about 50% for 9 to 12 months, and about 30% for those 1 to 2 years of age. And this baby-led weaning has become very, very popular today. I'm not sure how popular it is in South Africa. It's very popular in North America. And it's a method of feeding that just allows baby greater control of their food intake. And so basically what parents do is just give them food on a tray and encourage them to explore it and eat it in any way that they can. The idea is for them to get the food into their mouths completely independently without the help of a parent. And I'm not convinced that this is that we should be doing this exclusively for plant-based babies, because when we provide some foods on a spoon, it's easier to provide more of the iron-rich foods like iron-fortified infant cereal. Little hard for a baby to eat that with their hands. And also, when you're feeding with a spoon, it can allow for greater caloric intake. And so I think it's really reasonable to provide some foods for the baby to eat on their own. I think it's a really wonderful way of feeding, but I think mixing the two spoon feeding and baby-led weaning is probably a really good plan. Just very briefly discuss sample menus for infants from 6 to 8 months and 9 to 12 months. And really the biggest difference between these two age groups is in the 9 to 12 month age category, there's more food at snacks. We tend to have probably, starting at 6 months, maybe one solid food meal, and it gradually increases to 2 and then 3. And snacks tend to be breast milk, whereas for the 9 to 12 month children, there may be a couple of snacks in between meals. And one of the things that I would suggest, a couple of things. One is that you want to be including a variety of foods at each meal from each food group. So you're looking at some fruits and vegetables, some sort of starchy food like grains or a starchy vegetable, and then of course a source of protein. And then we want to also figure a way to get the fat in the meal. The fat will help with caloric density or energy density, and it will also help to enhance the absorption of all of those important fat-soluble nutrients in the food. So, a typical meal, you can see for example, lunch for the 9 to 12-month-old, soft cooked beans, soft steamed green beans, quinoa, and a little bit of avocado mixed in with the meal for the fat. So we've got something from the various food groups, and then you can see the snack that day being fruit with a cashew yogurt. So we were wanting to get a really good variety of foods for this age group. And then sample menus for toddlers look much the same. It's really important for small children that we include snacks because their bellies just aren't big enough to get in enough food to last them for 4 or 5 hours. So we do want to include the snacks as well. And this just gives you some ideas of good foods. And, at dinner, you can see I've got lentil pasta written down. There are all kinds of legume pastas. Children tend to love pastas, and it's kind of interesting that you can purchase a chickpea or lentil or zucchini bean pasta, and one serving of the pasta, small serving, would have at least 10 grams of protein. So it's, and a toddler needs 13 grams of protein. It's not a lot, so we can get a lot in that way. So let's talk finally about avoiding the nutrition shortfalls. And one of the things that we need to worry about is just making sure babies and toddlers get enough calories. So to ensure adequate calories, we want to be providing, as I mentioned, the regular meals and snacks between meals for this age group. We want to also avoid feeding excessive fiber. So you don't want to be sprinkling bran on foods or really focusing on low fat, high fiber foods. You want to make sure the fat is in there and that the fiber isn't excessive in the diet. I mentioned the fat already, and then we want to include grains or starchy vegetables and legumes at each meal. So these are more the energy dense foods as opposed to vegetables and fruits. We want to make sure, of course, we want vegetables and fruits in the meal, but we want to make sure that more calorically dense foods are present as well. Protein, to ensure sufficient protein, we want to include legumes or legume-based foods like tofu or veggie meats at each meal and even at some snacks as well. We want to weave in the nut and seed butters and creams. And I know for many years we thought that feeding nuts and seeds at an early age during infancy would increase risk of allergies. And we actually now know that quite the opposite is true, and earlier introduction is definitely highly recommended. And for very infants with a lot of eczema or who are from families with a high history of allergies, you will want to do that, with the advice of your pediatrician and doing it maybe even supervised in some cases, but generally early introduction is recommended. We want to make sure that we're selecting higher protein milk alternatives, so soy milk or pea milk for children at this stage of life. And then finally, of course, you know, if you don't get enough calories, you may not get enough protein either. So we want to ensure sufficient calories. What about omega-3 fatty acids? Well, to ensure sufficient omega-3s from birth to 12 months, babies get plenty from breast milk. So we want to breastfeed. And of course, mothers can increase the amount of omega-3s in their breast milk by consuming enough alpha-linolenic acid. They tend to convert fairly well during pregnancy, but they can also take in some direct sources of EPA and DHA from microalgae if they want to boost that a little further. And then select a formula that does contain DHA for formula-fed babies. And then for toddlers, continue breastfeeding. And then we want to make sure they get enough of the plant omega-3, which is alpha-linolenic acid. And I generally recommend, if you're not getting a direct source of EPA and DHA, that you double the ALA, which would make it about 1.4 grams for toddlers for those 1 to 3 years of age. And you can get that from a variety of foods, and then adding something like a half a teaspoon of flax oil, or a couple of teaspoons of ground flaxseed, 1.5 teaspoons of chia seeds, or a teaspoon of hemp seeds would do the trick. Or alternatively, you could do about 0.7 grams of alpha-linolenic acid plus around 70, I mean, you could do 70 to 100, but 70 should be sufficient milligrams of EPA and DHA daily using a liquid microalgae-based supplement. So my preference would actually be to include a little bit of EPA and DHA if it's accessible and you're not breastfeeding. If you are breastfeeding, I would worry less about that. Once breastfeeding stops, then you may want to consider that. Vitamin B12, to ensure sufficient B12 for breastfed babies. Here, you just have to make sure the mom has a reliable source daily, preferably. And I would say, you know, 100 micrograms a day should do the trick. And then formula-fed babies, B12 is present in formula, so that's not an issue. For toddlers 1 to 3 years of age, you can continue with breastfeeding, and ideally continue with breastfeeding. Or you can use other milks that are fortified with B12 if they're available to you. But even if you do that, let's say you're no longer breastfeeding and you're providing a milk with some B12 in it, it's not always sufficient. So I would add a supplement of about 250 micrograms of B12 a week, just to, you know, to give a little boost, even if you are using some fortified foods. Now, if you're not using a fortified milk or, you know, a B12 fortified milk, then I would say at least 250 micrograms twice a week, or, you know, 10 micrograms daily would be actually preferable of B12 drops for babies or for toddlers. Vitamin D, generally to ensure sufficient vitamin D from birth to 12 months, we're looking at about 400 IUs per day. And then during the toddler years, the RDA increases to 600. And it continues at 600 until you're about 70 years of age. So 600, and that could come from a combination of foods and supplements. But certainly it's tough to get from food, so most toddlers will need vitamin D drops. Iron to ensure sufficient, well, infants need a lot. They need 11 milligrams per day. And so in breastfed infants, full-term infants, you will get enough, they will have enough stores to last about 4 months, but at 4 months of age, what's generally recommended is iron drops, 1 milligram per kilogram. And you continue that until the baby is eating enough solid foods that provide, you know, that meet the RDA for iron. And generally that means having some iron fortified foods like iron fortified infant cereal. Premature infants, they don't have the iron stores, so they need the drops right away if they're being breastfed. So and what's typically recommended is 2 milligrams per kilogram from 1 through 12 months of age. And it may be more or less depending on the pediatrician and how, you know, the baby's doing iron-wise. For formula-fed infants, it's recommended that all formula-fed infants have iron-fortified formula. Now for toddlers, the RDA goes down to 7 milligrams, and so it's a little easier to achieve that. But one of the things that I suggest is to continue providing the iron fortified infant cereal. And it can be cooked in with regular porridge, it can be sprinkled on regular cereal, and it can be used to make little baby biscuits or baby cookies. My daughter actually uses in all of her flour products, 2/3 flour, 1/3 infant iron fortified infant cereal. So that gives a good boost to all of the products that are made for the kids. And then of course you want to include iron-rich foods like lentils and other legumes regularly. And you can use iron drops as well at that stage. Or if you're providing a multivite to the child, then choose one that does provide iron. Zinc can be an issue, and so to ensure sufficient zinc, you want to provide zinc-rich solid foods by 6 months of age because they need an exogenous source of zinc by 6 months. And so you want to include zinc-rich foods like legumes and tofu and nut and seed creams and butters and whole grains at each meal. You want to use techniques to reduce phytates in foods like soaking and sprouting and leavening and fermenting, as Jessica mentioned. And so this is important because where we see zinc deficiency is in places where people are feeding these unleavened breads as a staple, and there's not a lot of other foods provided. And so with unleavened breads, leavening breads will help to reduce zinc, but if you're feeding unleavened breads a lot, you want to make sure that there's a lot of lentils and other zinc-rich foods. You can also use, if you're using a toddler multi, you can use a toddler multi with zinc. Calcium, to ensure sufficient calcium, you want to include calcium fortified foods such as calcium fortified non-dairy milks, calcium set tofu, and other foods fortified with calcium, because the recommended intake of 700 milligrams for 1 to 3 year olds, and I'm not sure if it's the same in South Africa as it is in North America, but it's quite a lot of calcium for a little tiny person to get from whole foods. So the calcium fortified foods can really help make it easy to meet those RDAs. And we can also, of course, select calcium-rich plant foods at each meal, like low oxalate greens like kale and broccoli, and you know, all the Chinese greens, beans, edamame, almond butter, chia seeds, tahini, figs, blackstrap molasses are all good sources. Now, iodine actually can also be an issue for growing children, and you probably are well aware that iodine deficiency is the biggest cause of cognitive impairment in children across the world. So we really do need to make sure that children do have a source of iodine. So for infants, they'll get sufficient from breast milk if mom is getting it from food / supplements. Breastfeeding mom needs about 290 micrograms a day. You don't have to worry about it. Formula contains enough if the baby's being formula fed. And for toddlers, you want to, you know, if they're being breastfed and mom's getting plenty, they'll get some from that. But you want to provide a diet including small amounts of iodine, and the probably easiest way is iodized salt. In North America, about a 1/4 teaspoon of iodized salt contains about 71 micrograms, and the RDA for toddlers is 90 micrograms. And certainly things like nori, like this little guy is eating in the picture, could be a reasonable source as well. And if you're not using those things, then providing iodine drops or a multivite with iodine can also be do the trick. So a very quick supplement summary for infants. Breastfed infants need 400 IUs of vitamin D for the first 12 months and 1 milligram per kilogram iron beginning at 4 months until the RDA is met. Formula-fed infants don't need any supplements at all. And of course, vitamin D or vitamin B12 isn't required by breastfed infants as a supplement if the mother is getting sufficient in her diet. And supplements for toddlers, all toddlers need vitamin D. 600 IUs is recommended, can come from foods and or supplements. And vegan toddlers, vitamin B12 is recommended 10 micrograms per day if insufficient amounts are coming from fortified foods, which is probably what's happening for most vegan infants or vegan toddlers. And iodine, 90 micrograms a day if insufficient from fortified foods or sea vegetables. And EPA DHA, I would suggest 70 milligrams per day. It's optional, but it is well advised. And of course, so you're looking at vitamin D, B12, and iodine, or EPA DHA, or a toddler multivite with EPA and DHA also. So that sums it up. And I just wanted to show you a picture of our new book, which will be released next week. We're quite excited about that, or it's actually November 17th. And that's it. We're ready for questions, and I will stop my share. Let's see.
Thank you. Thank you so much to all the panelists. Those were incredible presentations full of knowledge, and I'm sure there were a lot of people in the audience who needed to hear what you shared today. So thank you very much. And before we get on to our questions and we move into a bit more of an interactive space, we are going to do a quick poll. And so you can expect the poll to pop up on your screen at any moment. And the poll is completely anonymous, and it's just for us to get to know our audience a little bit better, to find out who is joining and from which perspective. And so I'm going to be going through the questions, and I'll be asking the panelists some of your questions. So thank you very much. Just giving everybody a moment to answer the poll. My first question is from Siham in the Q&A, and I'm going to be directing this to Jess. What about calcium during pregnancy and infancy? I know that you referred to calcium in your presentation, opened it up for a question, and we do have somebody that is inquiring about it.
Okay, well, I think Brenda covered calcium during infancy pretty well, but during pregnancy, calcium is definitely important. And Brenda also mentioned the calcium-rich foods that we should be focusing on for calcium intake. So that would be things like kale and bok choy, some of the Asian cabbages, fortified plant milks, almond butter, tofu, those sorts of things. So generally speaking, I advise patients to try to include about 3 servings a day of calcium-rich foods during pregnancy. And if it's not possible to get all your calcium in through your diet, then you can definitely take a calcium supplement to kind of make up the difference. Especially, I think, during the first trimester, if you are struggling with nausea or food aversions, it can be quite tricky to get all of your calcium in just through diet alone. So you might need a calcium supplement.
And then when it comes to infancy, I would like to share with everybody that we will be sharing the presentations. So if you have missed any small details, I know there was a lot of information and we will be getting that to you. My next question is to Dr. Brenda Davis, and this is from Jana Deval. And she says, my twins were born at 28 weeks gestation. One had severe necrotizing enterocolitis and had 85% plus of his bowels removed and now has short bowel syndrome. They are 6 months old and eating solids. What protein-rich sources of food are age-appropriate, taking into account their prematurity and the one's medical history? Can I blend or puree silken tofu into their fruit for breakfast and lentils into their dinner? Are they too young for nut butter or blended quinoa? They have been vegan since conception. And I know that we did look at a meal plan, but perhaps this is condition specific.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jen, I'm so sorry to hear about the challenges. That must have been a really difficult experience for your family. Certainly at 6 months of age, there is no problem to be providing tofu. It doesn't even have to be blended, but it will help with digestion if it is. So, and it doesn't have to be silken. It can be, medium tofu that's blended in with whatever. And also the idea of nut and seed butters, they are actually super valuable. at this stage. And so I would say absolutely go ahead and provide those. That'll be a wonderful source of fat, and they just need to be blended. And the quinoa, the beans, all excellent choices. One of the things that you can do to reduce fiber in the legumes is to choose some legumes that have the outer part of the really fiber, outer sort of husk removed. So things like red lentils and yellow dal, which is actually yellow mung beans, and they can be soaked and then cooked really well, and they're wonderful. A little bit lower fiber legumes for toddlers and babies. So all of those things are great choices. And then again, to choose, you know, some, is she breastfeeding? I missed that. But anyway,
it didn't say, yeah.
Yeah, certainly all of those things are absolutely fine at that stage. Anything to add, Reshma or Jessica?
I would just say that with short gut syndrome, it might be advisable to meet with a dietitian, because the absorption of certain nutrients can be affected, and it's definitely a more complex medical situation. So some of the standard things that we recommend may not necessarily apply. So that's an instance where it may be helpful to meet with a dietitian.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. And a question that I'm going to direct to all the panelists. Are there any concerns with mock meat products being highly processed? And I'll wait for the first one to go ahead.
Well, I think that it's always advisable to sort of eat wholesome foods. And I think all of us would recommend trying to get your nutrients from things like the beans and the grains and the nuts and the seeds. I think that sometimes the mock meats can add a bit of convenience, and as Brenda mentioned, they can contain highly absorbable forms of protein. So I think it's perfectly fine and healthy to include them in small amounts in the diet, especially if it's going to add convenience. It's going to make it easier to follow this way of eating. And for children, I think it's important to not be overly restrictive. Certainly if you're looking to reverse or prevent some of these chronic diseases in adulthood, you may have to be a little bit more cautious. Some of the mock meats can contain high amounts of sodium and saturated fat and things like that. So I don't think that they should necessarily be a sort of a staple everyday kind of a thing, but they can certainly be used from time to time and enjoyed.
All right. Anybody else?
I can chime in as well. I think that we've gotten so I guess committed to whole food plant-based, which is a wonderful way of eating, that I think we've gotten too rigid in some respects. And if you compare mock meats with meat, you know, you don't have the cholesterol, you don't have as much saturated fat, you don't have the new 5-GC, which is a very pro-inflammatory molecule. You don't produce TMAO when you eat these mock meats compared to regular meats. There are a lot of advantages to mock meats over regular meats. So that's important to recognize. And then second, you need to recognize that there really are a wide variety of mock meats. And some are, you know, black bean and quinoa based, and some are made out of soy protein isolates. And so just to be conscious that while you don't necessarily want the more processed mock meats to be dietary staples, as Dr. Shaw said, it's not the worst thing in the world to have, you know, a veggie burger, or, you know, when your child's going out camping with their friends or whatever, to be able to have a tofu dog while everybody else having their beef dog. It's okay, and it's actually more than okay. It helps them to feel like they're part of the group, that they're not as isolated from a culinary perspective and a social perspective. And so I think we need to consider those things. One of the things that I would say is that some of the mock meats that are very highly processed the protein can be extracted with a chemical called hexane. And it's a neurotoxin. And so we don't know how much is left. Most is generally gone with the processing, but it's possible there's a little bit there. And so for parents who are concerned about that aspect, just choosing an organic mock meat will ensure that they're not using the harsher chemicals to extract the protein from those foods.
Thank you. I think that's a good question because there are so many available in South Africa at the moment. And speaking of specific availability in South Africa, this question is going to be for Jessica. And we have some people asking about brands of supplements for children. So the first question is from Yannicka Blake, and she says, which B12, iron, and vitamin D supplement brands in South Africa are recommended for 4-year-olds? Or perhaps the best multivitamin just to make sure your vegan child gets all the nutrients should they have a difficult day?
Mm-hmm. So it's quite tricky because we don't have a lot of vegan supplement options in South Africa. So often and especially for children, so for example, I haven't found a vegan vitamin D that is specifically made for children. But we do get vegan vitamin D supplements that do come in, a mouth spray form or liquid form, and we can just adjust the dosage for children. So that's usually what I would do with my patients. So that's for vitamin D. For vitamin B12, it's a similar situation. We don't have a specific pediatric vitamin B12 supplement that is actually vegan that I know of. So I usually recommend giving an adult chewable B12 and just breaking it into a smaller piece for children or crushing it into their food. So that's kind of what we have to work with over here. And I think I'm kind of more comfortable recommending specific supplements to patients individually. It's quite difficult without knowing what the child's diet is like to know really what to recommend to them. But if anyone wants more information on specific brands, I can definitely give those.
Jessica, is there a multivite for toddlers?
Not that I know of that's vegan, because most of them contain animal-derived vitamin D.
Yeah, so, and a lot of people, I think a lot of, I would say this, if you're concerned about your toddler's nutrient intake and you have to choose between a multivite that has vitamin D3 from lanolin versus nothing, choose the multivite with vitamin D from lanolin, because we just have to do the best we can. What is possible and practical within our area. And the other possibility is, of course, ordering it online, but I would still say don't be too concerned about that. I mean, certainly you want to do everything you can to encourage companies to sell 100% vegan products there, but as long as they're not available, then you need to do just the best you can.
Mm-hmm.
And then to take it further on supplements, we have a question about anybody's thoughts on moringa powder, baobab powder, and wheatgrass powder as a good supplement in addition to a healthy diet. And that was specifically for both pregnancy and babies from ages 6 months up.
Jessica, do you want to take that? I've never even heard of baobab powder.
It's an
African superfood.
Okay,
it's high in vitamin C. So, I mean, I think that we have to be cautious about seeing superfoods as supplements because they aren't actually supplements. They are just powdered, fruits and vegetables at the end of the day. And yes, they might have high levels of antioxidants. They might have some iron in them, some calcium in them, but I know something like moringa, for example, it's sort of marketed as this very high iron, very high calcium superfood that you could use as a calcium or iron supplement. And I don't usually recommend relying on that because if you actually look at the amount of calcium and iron in a teaspoon of moringa, it's really not sufficient to count as a supplement. So if you want to add, I sometimes add like baobab powder to smoothies because it tastes good and it adds some vitamin C. So you can definitely add those things for flavor, but or for some extra antioxidants, but I wouldn't use it to replace any supplementation. Definitely wouldn't use it in place of a vitamin B12 supplement, because I know some people believe that spirulina has vitamin B12 and things like that, which is not true.
Thank you. We have a question from an anonymous, which is, have you seen plant-based children with allergies, example, soy or nuts allergy, and how would you manage this as a dietitian?
Well, I guess I can take that one. Of course, we see allergies in all children, vegan or vegetarian or non-vegetarian, of course. And some of the common allergens are cow's milk and soy and nuts, and all of these eggs are very common allergens. Now, one of the things that we are learning, I mentioned in my presentation, is that earlier introduction tends to reduce later risk of allergies. So we definitely want to keep that in mind and make sure that we're not restricting those foods early on. But if a child has developed an allergy to nuts or to soy, obviously you have to avoid those things. And so what I would suggest is using a lot of other legumes and using a lot of seeds if they can tolerate seeds. And in fact, seeds are actually more nutrient dense than nuts. So they have more protein, they have more trace minerals, they just tend to have more essential fatty acids. So they're really, really good foods they have more protein. So, so generally things like hemp seeds and chia seeds and pumpkin seeds and their butter, creams and butters, are usually less allergenic than some of the nuts. So that's the direction I would go, and you can still create a completely nutritionally adequate diet doing that.
The only thing I would add is that some of these allergies, like cow's milk, which would not be included in a vegan diet, and soy foods, children can outgrow. It's the nut and shellfish and seafood allergies that they tend not to outgrow as much. But soy is something that children may outgrow. So it's worth seeing an allergist regularly to see what the status is in your child.
Awesome, thank you. I have a question that I think I'm going to direct to Dr. Davis. For a 6-month-old, if you add lentils to veggies to up the protein, what is the ratio that you should add it? And also, if you are adding nut butter, what is the ratio if you're adding it to fruit or veg?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I would have never even thought of that. But basically what you want to do is you want to look at what a child-sized serving should be. So generally we look at, for a toddler, it might be a 1/4 cup instead of a 1/2 cup. It's usually half serving. So a 1/2 cup of veggies, and then it would be, a 1/4 cup of the lentils. So it would be probably 2 parts veggie to 1 part lentil. However, if you increase the lentil a little bit and do 1/3, 1/2, or even half and half, that's fine too. It's not, you just want to make sure you're getting a serving of each in there. So that's kind of how I deal with that. With the nut butters and creams, again, it depends on the child, how much you want in. So most children, if they're slow growing, if you're wanting to add calories, you want to add fat. So then you might be a little more generous. So if you're putting in, for example, for a 1-year-old, you might put in a teaspoon of cashew butter to make a kind of a cream and then stir it in. If a child's slow growing, you might want to double that to 2 teaspoons. But you want to, you want to look at a 1/2 of an adult serving, and a serving is typically of nut butter a tablespoon. So you're looking at, a 1.5 teaspoons or a teaspoon to be appropriate.
Awesome. All right. We have quite a lot of questions. I'm very glad. This question is from Daniela. She says, thank you all for the great content. I use stevia water drops, sweeteners, as well as stevia sweetened pea protein. I am planning a pregnancy and I was wondering if stevia is safe.
Anybody?
Well, as far as I know, it is safe during pregnancy. And I've personally used stevia during pregnancy as well as xylitol. So I don't know of any issues with it.
My thinking is I think it's good to limit these things. Any non-caloric sweeteners, I would just be cautious not to overdo it. I think occasional bit of stevia in something is probably fine, but you definitely don't want to overdo it. And one of the things we know about some sweeteners is that they can interfere with the gut microbiota, and that's, you know, obviously not a good thing. And I'm not sure if that's the case for stevia. I have to go back to the list of which ones do negatively affect the gut microbiome, but definitely I would be cautious about not, you know, you don't want to be using it 3 times a day. I would say just more occasional use is probably quite acceptable though.
Great. I have a question that is coming in that has been submitted before the webinar. And this is fruit juice recommended for infants and toddlers?
So I think the American Academy of Pediatrics definitely recommends limiting fruit juice. I don't think that infants really need fruit juice at all, so I tend to avoid it. The only circumstance where I think fruit juice can be beneficial for babies like over 6 months is in the case of constipation. Sometimes I use it more as a therapeutic tool than as a nutritional add-on. And as kids get older, I would still consider limiting the fruit juice to no more than 4 ounces a day. It's one of those things that if you sort of create the habit of always having fruit juice around, I think they're always going to want that in terms of preferring that even over some solid food. So I think having it every now and then and limiting it to, you know, no more than 4 ounces for older kids is perfectly fine. But my preference would be to kind of give the whole fruit because you get all the other, you know, fiber and other things that come from it. I do think that fruit juice, sometimes you can use it in terms of flavoring things or adding sweetness to things. It's a great way to add, you know, sweetness to recipes and things without adding straight up sugar.
That's great. And we also, in South Africa, we do have a brand of fruit juice called Rugani juice from South Africa's biggest carrot, the world's biggest carrot producers. And that is 100% juice. So it is, there's no other sugars in there. And then we have quite a few social questions. I'm going to touch on a few of them. So the first one was one that was submitted before the webinar and says that there are some family members who are concerned about my 4-year-old feeling excluded and different. And then in the Q&A, we also have some parents maybe wondering how can we maintain our kids on a plant-based diet or a vegan lifestyle when they go to parties when they're young. Just a thought about from somebody who's looking to become a mother. And I'm just seeing if I think there is another one. But yes, just I think there's a question on how to overcome this social dilemma. Are they going to be, I think people are a bit worried maybe their kids are going to be outcasted, or what do they do when they go to parties, or how do they explain it to their family members?
I think there's like a lot of questions looped into there, and maybe I'll just take one part of it. One thing is I think it's really going to depend on the age of the child and sort of when you're starting the process. I think if you're starting from the very beginning, it's going to be a different approach than if you've got older kids or teenagers. And I always try to have parents let the child guide your direction. So if you've got a child that really just wants to go to the birthday party and eat the pizza or eat the, you know, the birthday cake or whatever, I think one way to start is to sort of be plant-based or vegan at home. And if your child is really wanting to have a little more flexibility outside of the home, to give it to them so that you don't create a lot of tension and stress and pressure around it. I think the other thing we have to keep in mind is that kids have dietary restrictions for all sorts of reasons. So I've got a child with a nut allergy, and it automatically introduces a level of carefulness that other children don't have to go through, and it has nothing to do with following a vegan diet. And I think people, because of food allergies and dietary restrictions and limitations, are becoming much more acceptable of people's needs and desires when it comes to food at parties and things like that. So it's not just something that vegan children and families have to deal with. It's, I think, something a lot of families have to deal with. So normalizing it and really letting your child's sort of emotions and needs guide your response more so than, you know, outside opinions from grandparents and well-meaning aunts and uncles and things like that.
And I just have to tell you a story. I love your answer, Reshma. That was perfect. That's what I did. I have a 33 and a almost 36-year-old. And when my son was 4 years old, we basically did exactly what you said. We said, you know, we're vegetarian, well, pretty much vegan in our home, but what you do outside of our home is your choice. And I can remember when my son was 4 years old, he went to a little party at a friend's house, and they barbecued pork, and he ate some, and he knew what he was eating, and he didn't know it was pig. He just knew he was eating some sort of animal thing. And when he got home, he asked me what kind of animal pork was, and I told him it was a pig, and he literally collapsed on the floor and cried for an hour. I ate a pig, I ate a pig. How could I be eating a pig? Oh, don't ever let me eat a pig again. And so he took ownership of that. He never did it again. That was it for him. He, you know, and sometimes I think it's reasonable to give kids ownership over the food choices they're making outside of the home. So, personal decision though, a tough one.
That is such an adorable story. Okay, so I'm going to be moving on to some of the other questions. Jessica, I know you did touch on this, but this is a little bit of a different question. Do we have a complete vegan supplement safe from 1 year of age to use as a sole source of nutrition for a vegan child via pig feeds?
That question must come from a dietitian.
Yes.
So no, not that I know of. I think there would probably be, definitely there's a lactose-free sort of enteral feed that we can use in pig feeds. I don't even know of a soy-based one, actually. There's elemental feeds, but those are not, and semi-elemental feeds, but those are not actually vegan. So as far as I know, there are no enteral feeds that are actually vegan. Yeah.
Could you not use a toddler, vegan toddler formula? There are a lot of vegan organic toddler formulas, and then maybe blend some foods into them to get that, you know, fiber and all of the, you know, phytochemicals and such mixed in. I think that could be a pretty easy solution if a parent really wanted it vegan, just an option.
Thank you. And we have two questions, one from Anonymous and one from Marcus B. The first one is, what is the best way to get adequate omega-3 aside from supplementation, and then also the best source of fatty acids, because specifically it's important for brain development?
Well, I can certainly take that question. So the thing that people need to understand is there's really two types of omega-3 supplements. The other essential fatty acids, like we have linoleic acid is an omega-6, is not difficult to get enough of. The challenging one is the omega-3. And so there are plant omega-3s called alpha-linolenic acid, and then there's the long chain omega-3s, which are EPA, DPA, and DHA. And the EPA and DHA are really the more biologically active of the omega-3s. And so they're super important for brain development and for our cell membranes and just for all of those reactions in the body. We make a variety of eicosanoids from EPA, and we make resolvins and protectants from DHA, and there are all of these things, chemicals in the body that are important. And so the big question is, can we convert the plant omega-3s sufficiently to make enough of these biologically active long chain omega-3s. And we don't really know, to be honest. We don't have a lot of people who were born and raised vegan for their whole lives. And so we've looked at conversion, and in fact, in young women, conversion is pretty efficient. We convert, about the one study that I know of showed a 36% conversion from alpha-linolenic acid. So certainly it's possible that children can convert enough from alpha-linolenic acid. And the main sources of alpha-linolenic acid are flax seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, walnuts, and there's a little bit in soy. There's half the fat in greens is ALA, but the problem is there's hardly any fat in greens. You'd have to eat like a horse or a cow to get enough. So certainly you want to rely on these plant omega-3 sources. The long chain omega-3s for most omnivores come from fish. And so, vegans, I mean, there's a little bit of EPA in seaweed. There's a little bit of DHA in eggs if you're a lacto-ovo vegetarian. But what about people that aren't using any of those foods? And so people think, well, an omnivorous diet is better because it contains the long chain omega-3s. But what people don't realize is that those long chain omega-3s originally came from plants in the ocean, and they're called microalgae. And so we can actually, without, raping the ocean of its fish, we can actually culture microalgae and extract the EPA and DHA from it. And so we're really getting our EPA and DHA from the same place fish do, and taking a supplement. And I think it's a really reasonable, if it's accessible, if you can afford it, to provide a little bit of the EPA DHA for your children. If you can't, then you definitely need to be conscious about including the plant sources of alpha-linolenic acid and doing what you can do to avoid, or I should say to maximize conversion of that plant source of omega-3. And that means, a balanced diet. It means getting enough zinc and all of the nutrients that are involved in the conversion. It means not overdoing omega-6s, because if you're pouring safflower and sunflower oil and, all over your food, and they're really rich in omega-6s, it can actually impair the conversion 40, 50, 60% of that plant omega-3 into the long chain omega-3s. So it's a little bit complicated, but generally, in a nutshell, you want to make sure you've got plant omega-3s, and if you can manage it, add in the DHA and EPA.
Thank you.
Can I just add, for those that are looking for algae-based omega-3s, we do have some great ones in South Africa. We don't have any, no, we actually have some that come in liquid form too, so they can be given to children. So just to mention some brands, PhytoPro makes a algae-based omega-3 supplement, Omega Pure makes one, and Fluoroforce makes one.
Thanks. I have a question here that says it's also overwhelming the amount of vitamins to cover for toddlers. Is it acceptable to give the child a multivitamin whilst obviously doing the best with food for peace of mind?
100% yes. I think.
Absolutely.
I think, the other thing we didn't really talk much about is that toddlers can be kind of finicky. You may have the best intentions of creating this meal, and they'll decide that they just want to eat the pasta or they just want to eat the strawberry. So I think multivitamin, I think Jess can probably talk more about what's specifically available in South Africa, but I think there's absolutely no harm in doing a multivitamin to ensure that your child is getting all the nutrients, because as Brenda mentioned, our top priority is always their adequate growth and development. So there is absolutely no harm in including a multivitamin to ensure that they meet their requirements. And the last thing I'll add is that it's also for omnivorous children. I've treated a lot of children with iron deficiency anemia. I've treated children for vitamin D deficiency, none of whom were following a plant-based diet. So I know that sometimes it can feel a little overwhelming to feel like, I want to be plant-based, I want to be vegan, but I can't remember all these nutrients. And we mention these things so that you can do it successfully for your family, but using a multivitamin is absolutely not okay, but recommended if you're concerned about your child meeting their nutrient requirements.
Thank you. We have a question from Nicola Adams, and she first says thank you for the presentation. It's very informative. And her child is an 8-year-old, so a little bit older, but I thought I'd ask the question anyway. He has, or she has been vegan for about 18 months now. A lot of the info is for toddlers, but I always worry if he's getting enough of everything. He likes a lot of mock meats, unfortunately, and which I just said, and battled to get him to eat beans and legumes. And also said that he likes tofu, but something in the back of my mind keeps reminding me of the soy debate.
Well, first of all, I would say she's doing a fantastic job. I think you can, with older children, you can expect some challenges along the way. You know, they have been out in the world for longer, they have habits, they have preferences. So she's doing a great job. One thing that I've found with my own children with the mock meats and the beans is I think pastas are a great way to add things in. So if you're going to make a pasta which has some mock meats sort of crumbled in, you could also add a can of chickpea or, you know, some chickpeas or other beans to kind of incorporate it in and find other creative ways. So if they don't like whole chickpeas, they may love hummus. So you just have to kind of experiment and, you know, get them involved with food preparation. I think that the more that kids are involved in making the recipe, the more likely they are going to want to try it. So I think have a lot of patience, and you know, these things are not meant to be fixed in a day or a meal. We're kind of in it for the long run. So make it enjoyable, try to get them involved, and you know, experiment with different ways of introducing these foods.
Thank you. And one from Alna Lash saying, my grandchild's doctor believes in jasmine rice as a staple diet for her kids. She says it's full of all the right nutrients. A little broccoli on the side, no meat. Your view on jasmine rice, please.
Jessica, go ahead.
I mean, I think Brenda covered this pretty well because she spoke about the arsenic contamination in rice. So I would be cautious of including too much rice in the diet. I think, you know, once or twice a week to have some rice is okay, but I would try to vary it with other types of grains. And it sounds like what this doctor is recommending is almost a predominantly rice-based diet with very little variety, and doesn't sound like there are good sources of protein in there either. So I definitely wouldn't recommend that type of diet. Definitely a more balanced diet, and including some beans and legumes and soy products and a variety of whole grains and a variety of vegetables, not just broccoli.
Great. Another question here is, if taking prenatal vitamins, do you still need to take other supplements when following a plant-based diet? And we did talk about this quite a bit. And I think most of that will be in the presentation. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, Jessica.
The only thing to add is that prenatal vitamins can vary in terms of what they include. So the most important thing is to look at the label for your specific prenatal vitamin and make sure it has adequate amounts of the things that you would need. So I think every prenatal is a little bit different, so just read the label.
Mm-hmm. I also do find that most prenatals are a little bit low in vitamin B12 for people on a plant-based diet. So I always suggest adding a separate B12 or an additional B12 supplement. And definitely, as Brenda explained, some sort of, I think it's really important during pregnancy to take like a long chain omega-3, so a DHA EPA supplement, and that's not usually included in a prenatal. And then, as we spoke about, sometimes it's necessary to take some extra calcium, and sometimes it's necessary to take some extra iron.
And the other things that you might want to specifically look at, as Reshma was saying, that the amounts on, you know, differ in different supplements. Two things that I like to look for are iodine and choline. And just because a lot of supplements actually don't have them, it would be preferable if they did. So when you're looking, if you can find, you know, what you want is about 220 micrograms of iodine and about 450 of choline during pregnancy. So if you can find, I mean, they won't have that much, but even just a little bit will contribute to overall intake.
Mm-hmm.
All right. We have two more questions here. And the first one I'm going to ask is, in your opinion, are plant-based diets expensive for lower socioeconomic clients?
I think it just depends on the kind of plant-based foods you intend to include. So doing a lot of like veggie meats and cheeses and, things that are a little bit more processed can definitely, the cost can add up. So, trying to cook more beans and vegetables and things like that. I think the idea that plant-based diets are expensive, they absolutely can be, but they can also be quite economical. So I also find that sometimes in order to be more economical, you may have to spend a bit more time. So buying beans in bulk and in dried form can be a lot cheaper than buying them in canned form, but then you'll have to cook the beans. And the same with whole grains and fruits and vegetables. And you can also use, frozen fruits and vegetables can add a lot of flexibility and, limit the amount of spoilage as well.
Thank you. The last question is thoughts on organic fruits and vegetables compared with normal fruits and vegetables found in supermarkets with regards to lower nutritional value?
Yeah, there's a little bit of evidence that organic foods may be slightly more concentrated in some nutrients, particularly phytochemicals, because they're having to, phytochemicals are basically the little army that protects the plant. And so when you don't have the protection against predators from sprays and whatnot, then the plant has to produce more of those. So they produce more phytochemicals. So I think there are some advantages in that regard, but the biggest advantage to me is the reduction in the amount of potentially toxic compounds that your little tiny child is ingesting. And so when you can grow your own foods or buy organic, it's wonderful. Now, the one thing that we do know for sure is you are better off eating a vegetable that's a conventional vegetable than not eating a vegetable. So there's no question. The research is very clear. Any vegetable intake is better than, little or none. But if you have the choice and you have the means, then choosing organic is certainly desirable. And you can do that by growing your own food if you have the means to do that as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to make, that eating conventional vegetables is still better than not eating vegetables at all. We've had another question come through, which I think is quite interesting. Which foods can help increase breast milk production?
Jessica, did you want to take that? Or?
Okay. I mean, so in my opinion, there's no magical food that increases breast milk production. But definitely when you are breastfeeding, you need to be taking in enough calories and hydrating well, because, a large proportion of breast milk is water. So lack of hydration or underhydration can definitely influence breast milk production. So I just encourage patients to eat a healthy, balanced diet and definitely eat enough calories, eat enough protein, eat enough healthy fats, and hydrate well while breastfeeding, almost, a glass of water with every feed at least.
And there are some herbs and things that have been shown to perhaps increase breast milk production. I think it's important to work with a really good lactation consultant. I think things like fenugreek, that's been reported in the literature that they can help to stimulate breast milk production, but work with a good lactation consultant. And I think what Jess said is absolutely spot on. The most important thing is just get adequate calories, adequate hydration. And the last thing I'll add is just also stress. So I think that when moms approach breastfeeding, it can be a very stressful time. I remember the first time we went home with our baby, who's now 18 years old, I thought, I'm a pediatrician and you're just going to let me walk out of the hospital with this child? Is there no manual to tell me how to do things? So it can definitely be a very stressful time. So just taking care of yourself, making sure you're getting adequate nutrition and rest is really important. And then working with a good lactation consultant for certain herbs and things that could potentially help, I think, is what I would recommend.
Thank you. All right, so before we wrap up, I'm just going to mention, because I did see that there are a lot of dietitians and there's a lot of medical doctors tuning in, health professionals. If you are tuning in from South Africa, I'd like to just take an opportunity to mention the Physicians Association for Nutrition South Africa. It is the South African branch of the International Association based in Germany. And it has recently launched in South Africa to educate health professionals and medical students and empower patients to create dietary changes for a whole food, plant-based diet, and to be able to share evidence-based materials about the plant-based diet to health professionals. And I have put the link of the website in the chat, as well as an email address if anybody is interested. And then we are heading towards 8:30 in South African time. And so I'd like to say a big warm thank you to the three women who shared so much information with us today about plant-based for pregnancy and for young kids. It was so informative, and I'm very grateful that we were able to share this information with so many people who really need it. So I wish you all the best. I'm very looking forward to seeing your books, and I hope you have a lovely evening.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Nanine.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. All right. Thank you for your questions, everybody. We will follow up with the replay and with the presentations.